Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so happy to be in this beautiful space with Ruth Wilson, new mentor and hero of mine for the work that Ruth spent a lifetime, I'm sure a lifetime of other things. I think it's been about 3 decades that she's been working deeply in the field of children and nature specifically. It might be a longer lifetime, and we're going to get to hear about it. And incredibly beautiful influences and influence that you've had on this world of fighting against Richard Louv's nature deficiency and creating nature connection in children and families. And anyway, I'm so excited about this topic of conversation. So welcome, Ruth. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and let's just have this beautiful, joyful conversation.
Hello, Jessica, and everyone else. Yes, I am Ruth Wilson. I've been a teacher and a teacher educator most of my life. But I think what gives me the greatest joy and perhaps the most influence is in terms of my writing. I've always wanted to be a writer and always wanted to have something to write about. So once I discovered the world of nature and the idea of connecting nature and children, I go, that's it. That is my path. So I started out when I used to be young. I did have my own preschool program, and I just kind of went about winging it in terms of, okay, what do we do with a group of 25 preschool children? And I found out by following their interest, that told me what I should be doing. They loved the outdoors. They loved the grass. They loved the worms. They loved the birds. They loved the trees. So I go, that's it. That's going to be my program. So it started then, but I really worked the most in connecting kids with nature when I was teaching teachers. I taught at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. I was in the early childhood and special education areas most of the time. I quickly jumped over the fence, which was truly a fence because it was 2 different colleges. And at a university, sometimes there were separate buildings or separate faculties, but I jumped over the fence of education into environmental studies. I go, these 2 need to be connected. I mean, we're talking about people and what they're interested in, what they care about, what helps them grow. So I jumped over the fence and I combined early childhood education and environmental education. And
Thank you.
That was the trajectory of my work ever since. So I worked with teachers, and after I retired from my teaching career, I spent most of my time writing. So I've written books about children and nature. But then about 9 years ago, I heard about the Children in Nature Network, which is an international network, people interested in connecting children with nature. And it did start with Richard Louv, who wrote the book, about what's titled The Last Child in the Woods. I was very fortunate to be one of the early members of their staff. And my particular role was with the research library. So I had the great privilege and challenge of reading research studies, which 20 years ago, there were very few research studies focusing specifically on children and nature. Today, we have over 1,500 summaries of research relating to children and nature in that library. So wow. I worked with that for over 8 years. I just retired from that work in late December of 2024. So
that's how I found you. I saw an article that wrote about the honoring you for all the work you'd done, and that you were retiring and how much you would be missed, and the influence that you had. And you say this sort of with a tremendous amount of humility, that when you started. And by the way, you have a PhD in either in one or the other or across the bridge. You have to
really in education, in childhood education.
And that, you've written many a journal article about nature and children, and written these beautiful books. And then in recent years, focused somewhat on special ed, which you said you had a love for as well. And I know that you have a brother who influenced your experience with that. So we'd love to hear those, some of those stories as well and share them. But I'm guessing that your role and the Children and Nature Network's role and Richard Louve's role and his work had some influence in increasing the number of journal articles from a few to the 1,500 there are now. So can you tell us a little bit about, how that trajectory, as you called it, worked to, how did you make it work? How did the importance of nature and children grow and amplify?
I really think the impetus was Richard Louve's book. I mean, that's what many people read and realized this is a problem. At that time, when Richard wrote the book, of course, we didn't have a long period of time to go back and say, well, what happens when kids are not connected to nature? What happens? Yeah. So his book just raised the question and the concern. What may happen could be very harmful to both children and the environment. The Children and Nature Network focuses on children, the health of the children, the mental health, the physical health, the social health, but also looks at they can't be whole without the connection to the environment.
Yeah.
And of course, they live within the natural world. So to be healthy, the natural world has to be healthy. So Richard Louve's book, I would say, generated a lot of interest. And once people paid attention to the concern, then I was absolutely amazed how many different disciplines became involved. So the studies in the research library, they aren't just about or from people working in education. It includes medical professionals, people working in the mental health field, people in the landscape design field. It's just all of the different disciplines, psychology, philosophy.
Agriculture, I would think, farming,
Yes, even tourism.
Nutrition,
family studies. Yeah, that's all somehow connected to what's going on with children and nature.
Let's talk for a moment about nature deficit disorder, like just so that we can put it out there for our listeners, because you and I are on the same page. We get this and we're like obsessed with it, right? But tell us a little bit about, what it is, what was found out, and what the impact is of this disconnect between children growing up with a connection to nature and children now growing up inside, in front of screens, disconnected from each other, disconnected from all of the senses of truly embodying a connection with nature as opposed to watching it on video, whatever.
Well, to start out with, and Richard makes it very clear in his book and all of his writings and presentations, that the nature deficit disorder is not a formal diagnosis, either in mental health or physical health.
Yet.
At the behaviors and the consequences in terms of development if the child is not connected with nature. There are physical ramifications. Children who aren't outdoors in nature tend to be less active, for one thing, and we know that affects their health. But we also know in terms of physical health, there's some vision problems, there's balance problems. In mental health, there is a lot more just anxiety. What I really love about what has happened as a result of Richard Louve's work is the focus more on, well, what are the benefits? So we don't have a long period of time to go back and look at what the problems have been, but we have been able to look at the benefits. Yeah. So we can look at the young children who do have the opportunities to be involved with nature and look at the good stuff that goes on. As we have kind of summarized it in the research library information, we know we have many, many studies summarizing the research saying nature makes kids healthier, happier, smarter, and better stewards of the environment. So we usually focus
and better connected, but better in relationships, right?
Absolutely. The studies showing or comparing groups of children playing indoors or outdoors, their interactions are much more cooperative and friendly and helpful outdoors than indoors. The children's play is a richer kind of play. It tends to have more imagination. It's more inclusive. So yes, that certainly is an area that makes a big difference. in the
So I'm a positive psychologist. So I love to approach things in a positive sense. For just what you just said, like, let's not look at what we lost. Let's look at what we're gaining here. So kids who do spend time in nature, I mean, I have a few, the three things you mentioned specifically, three of them were vision, balance, and anxiety. I also added immunity. And I had a conversation with Mitch Rawlick, who's a regenerative farmer, about this a couple of weeks ago in an episode that, I feel so strongly about being in the dirt, and he's like, you need to eat the dirt. Like you need to actually not by you need to taste it. Like you need to get this going in your body and this antibacterial everything, especially since COVID, it's even, more dramatic, but it was before then too. There was a lot of antibacterial everything before that, right? Didn't seem to help us, but who knows? So just because I love these four topics, let's do a moment on each of them. Let's talk vision, right? So I know that we're looking in our phones, which are 8 inches from us or whatever, or 4, 6. And then we're looking at computers, which are 16 inches from us. I don't know what the right numbers are, and we're messing with our vision that we're not moving our eyes back and forth, right? Like we're not so tell us more about vision.
Years ago, when I was a kid, which is over 80 years ago, we were told, don't have your eyes on books all the time because too much book reading would hurt your eyes. Well, that's not true. And the main thing about vision and being connected to nature, it's not so much that the screen is going to hurt your vision as much as you're going to miss out on the vitamin D from being outdoors.
Okay.
And as you said, it's that distance and nearness that's really
it's the muscles, right? Like you need to move your eyes back and forth and focus at different and with different amounts of light, plus the vitamin D. Yeah. Okay. So that's vision. One of the six, I'm going to go with 6 senses. One of the 6 senses, the other senses, come so much more alive as well if you're in the outdoors. I mean, you can smell the cooking, you can smell the chemicals in your house, you can smell, but the smells that you experience, the range of smell, of scent in nature versus inside must be drastically different, right? So you've got that same greater sense of discovery and curiosity. And I assume it's good for your brain to have more input, variety of input on all your senses.
Yeah. It's good for your brain. It's good for that sensory integration. So to take in the stimuli from your senses and to make sense of it, to see how the different stimuli integrate and what it means in terms of your body functioning.
Yeah. So all of your senses. So you've got the same thing with touch. I mean, if you're touching things in nature, you've got all different types of textures and wetnesses, dampnesses and all the different aspects of texture that I imagine is just important. And hearing, like being able to listen to the different channels of a bird versus even a garbage truck versus a different bird versus a squirrel versus the rustling in the leaves versus it's very different from sitting and being on your computer screen.
So that meaning making that goes along with it, to make meaning of the senses that are the sounds that we hear. Where is that coming from? What does it do? So yes, sometimes even what it might warn you about. If you hear thunder, you get the idea that a storm may be coming. So the sense, the hearing can give you so many messages. And as I said, it helps to make meaning of your world.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So we're done. The senses, clearly we need nature. We need to get out into nature. Okay. We've got balance. And as I get older and we've gotten older, like balance as an older person is more, relevant to us. Like we think about balance more, right? And we hear about it. But the development of your physical strength, which is way benefited by not only walking on flat ground, right?
Right. Yes, you need to walk on different types of surfaces. So you do need to walk and step over logs, walk across stones. All of that helps in terms of knowing how your body works. If you only walk on flat surfaces, then your body doesn't know how to adjust when you have a different type of surface.
So you tip
So,
over.
exactly. And there are some studies showing that kids who have not spent much time outdoors, they are bumping into each other. They're
Wow.
bumping into furniture. They are falling out of their seats in school. They just don't know how to pull it all together in terms of their physical body.
So I imagine limited muscle development. It's
Right.
very narrow muscle development, right? Like
Yes, yes.
versus
So your whole range of physical activity it shrinks. It shrinks. Yeah, and that's not good for
no, it's not good for anybody. Okay. Now let's go mental health. Not mental illness, mental health. We're talking the lower stress, the lower anxiety, the ability to get to the resilience to be able to manage your emotions, your experiences without losing it, right? So let's go to anxiety. Tell me about anxiety. Tell us about anxiety and nature.
Well, we can look at kids, and when they are feeling anxious and you give them the opportunity or you take them outside, spend time together outdoors, their anxiety level goes down.
Totally proven. Tons of research, right? Like it's been scientifically proven.
Yes, yes. There's a whole theory about stress reduction, the stress reduction theory. You are stressed, go outside, stress reduces for any age. From infant through my age, there's the reduction in stress, which of course is not only mental health, it affects your physical health, it affects your social interaction, it affects how you feel about yourself. So these are no small things.
You know, it reminds me of, I'm sure that you've got some story about this, I'm guessing. It reminds me of like these images I've seen with mothers, parents, whatever, in like cold areas like Scandinavia, who are out with their young babies in strollers, like outside in the middle of the winter, like they need fresh air. They need to be out in the elements. You're nodding. I'm sure you have, you know, some very significant knowledge about this issue. Tell us about this.
I can tell you one that's not even outdoors, but it has to do with nature. And a director of a preschool told me about this. There was a girl, I think she was either 3 or 4 years old. She was really a nature-based preschool in the classroom. She was really acting out in terms of lashing out at other children, defying the teacher's wishes. And so the teacher did take her down to the principal's office and said, you need to be away from the other children for a while. So the girl was in the principal's office and the principal said, could I just hold you for a minute? You know, you really seem upset. So the child was sitting on the principal's lap. And I don't know what the principal said, but the girl spit into the face of the principal, but some of the spittle went on the plant on the desk. And the principal did not react to the spit on her face, but she said, I'm worried about the plant. I don't know if this is going to hurt the plant. And the little girl calmed down immediately. That was, I don't want to hurt the plant, is how her, what her behavior suggested. And so she asked about, what can we do? They wiped it off. And then by the end of the session, the principal said, well, maybe you'd like to come back tomorrow and we'll see how the plant is doing. I mean, just the focus on a living plant. Change the child, calm the child down, brought her into that sense of caring, changed her behavior entirely. There are stories also in the one book that I just wrote, and it's called Naturally Inclusive. And it's all about including children with differing abilities in outdoor settings. In many cases, in a group setting, because it's primarily for nature-based preschool programs. And there too, the stories that both the parents and the teachers tell about how different the children's behaviors are outdoors, because there's something about nature that calms them down, that helps them integrate all of the inputs from their senses, from the activity of people around them. So yeah, it's really, I go, so many gifts that nature gives to children, gives to all of us in terms of our behaviors, our sense of self, just how we get along in the world.
Well, two things are really coming to mind that you're offering to me. One of them is this sense of self and this sense of being in something larger than yourself, which when you step out into nature, wherever you are, whether you're looking at the stars or you're looking at any aspect of being outside in nature, with nature, ego drops away, right? So it's about you being part of something, not it all being about you, which is such an issue in this society that we live in, right? It's all about me. I need to be happy. I need to be this. I need to be that. And so that is so coming to mind on this. And then I want to talk metaphor with you. So, but respond to, let's talk about this greater sense of, being part of something bigger. Because you've got this big smile on your face and I love it.
You're hitting on a topic that I've been writing about for the last 6 months. My next book is on the spiritual dimensions of connectedness to nature for children. And one of the, themes that run throughout the whole book, it is that idea of decentering the self or losing that sense of self because you're a part of something so much bigger, a place so much full of wonder. We often talk about how nature fills us with this sense of wonder, and especially for children, young children, where everything is new. But the greatest wonder of all that comes almost like an aha at some point, it's the wonder of being a part of all of this around us. I mean, what could be more wonderful than that realization? Yeah. And it's true, when we are so caught up in ourselves, our world is small. Yeah. We might think it's very, very important, but in the grand scheme of things and the way we can have such a much, much bigger world, it is that sense of oneness, the knowing it's all connected and we're a part of it.
You offered the word gift before, and what occurs to me is that the gift and the connection with anxiety and the connection with the calm and the resetting of your body, of your body and your mind from, stepping out of the stressful environment, and the gift of not having to be the center of it, to be able to not have to focus on yourself and to be in wonder and in awe. For any age, but for children, to give them that gift so that it becomes a practice and that they know the result, the bonus, the benefit of that experience. So we'll reach for it. We'll reach to a connection in nature as a natural practice, as opposed to having to figure it out later in life, right? And unlearn stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Another gift that nature gives is that sense of belonging. So you feel a part of it, and that our need as humans to belong, the nature gives us so much of that feeling. I belong. Nature is our natural habitat. We know plants and animals do so much better in their natural habitat. Well, so do we as humans. Yeah. Nature is our natural habitat. That's where we can bloom the best.
Yeah. It's making me think of I'm literally picturing myself or feeling myself, standing out in a garden or whatever, or in the woods, and over my feet, there's ants walking across me, and the wind is blowing, and the sun is and the tree is touching me, and I am in it. I am, and I belong, right? That's what you're saying. Instead of putting yourself in a space that's not part of where you belong, to imagine it instead as that this is where this is comfortable. I'm in it. I don't own it. I don't control it. I don't need to control it.
And one thing about nature, it is non-discriminatory. It does not discriminate against certain kinds of people, certain age of people, certain abilities. It simply does not. And I think that adds to that sense of comfort and belonging. Nature doesn't discriminate.
No, even more so in terms of looking at a positive lens. I'm thinking about you always hear these stories about how your pet or a farm animal, someone who knows an animal, some bit of wildlife, or maybe it works with plants too, I imagine it does, who know you, sense you and what you need. So it actually is more positively responsive, right? It's not just that everyone's accepted, it's that you're even more accepted if if they sense a sense of sadness or weakness or something, right?
Absolutely. Yes, yes, that's very true. And more scholars who are writing about the nature human connection
Mm,
are pointing out the reality of reciprocity. We
yeah.
sometimes think of ourselves as humans. Well, we have a responsibility to
Mhm.
take care of nature. Well, it's not one way. Nature takes care of us as
Yeah.
well. It's a back and forth. I love that idea of reciprocity. It's a relationship.
Say more, like give us some examples, because this is such a beautiful construct that we need to like sort of feel it. So what's coming to mind? What are some examples of the reciprocity that come to mind?
Well, obviously, when we take care of a tomato plant,
Mm,
if conditions are right, the plant produces the tomato for us to eat. So that's a very easy way to look at reciprocity. But there's also that idea of, let's see how I might say that, of being accepted. And I know I've already talked about that, but being with rather than separate from. For example, 2 days ago, I went out for a hike just outside of my neighborhood where we've got some beautiful hiking trails, and it was windy. Sometimes I avoid a hike if it's windy, but on that particular day, I felt invited. I actually
mm,
felt invited to be out with the wind rather than in the
wow.
wind. And so my whole focus as I was hiking, it was on this give and take. It was the
Wow.
invitation to be out there. I felt in and with.
So you weren't fighting it. You weren't like struggling with, oh, and being upset by it. It was all positive energy that
Yes,
you're
yes,
in it. And that I imagine like your body was moving with it and joyfully, not fighting it.
exactly. Yes. So when the wind was behind my back, to feel that, hey, I'm being moved along with the wind, having it blow through my hair. What a wonderful
Mm,
experience. Another example, I once was doing a workshop with some teachers. And when I have done workshops, I always want it to be hands on, action oriented rather than
mhm,
just talk, talk, talk.
mhm.
So I had some outdoor activities planned for the teachers. It rained that day. And so I gave the teachers an option. I said, okay, I know some of you would prefer not getting wet in the rain, but if there are some of you who want to go out, here's an activity you might do. About 1/3 of the teachers decided, yeah, let's just do that. And when they came back in and reported to the others, the first comment they made was, that was so much
Fun, right?
so, in terms of reciprocity, the teachers were putting themselves out to be in this rainy weather. But in the meantime, the rain was enriching them in such a
Mhm.
fun, delightful way.
You remind me of the, and I've noticed this a lot lately, and it's not a new thing. It's just, what you notice grows, right? And I've just noticed, and I'm judging, this is a judgment call, but too often people make comments, and even children. The other day, like a child who was probably, I think, 11 or 12, commented, and adults do this, on someone else's behavior being childish or infantile or not adult enough, and their behavior. And I could just go with it, but I don't. And I push back and I'm like, but what makes only a child allowed to have fun? Going out and being in the rain, why is that why do you have to stop having fun when you grow up? And this is not a new topic. I mean, this is a big, but I think we don't talk about it enough, and we're not giving ourselves permission. And your story is perfect, right? So like these teachers had the chance to get out of the classroom and out of their studies and go play in the rain and jump in a puddle and see what the world is like when it's wet, which is different, right? And their comment when they got back was not feeling guilty that they had had fun, but joyful they had had fun. So go with that whole thing of,
Yes,
of
yes,
this
yes,
child versus adult behavior.
exactly. Yeah, that sense of wonder. And Rachel Carson, who was a
Mhm. Yeah.
scientist,
Yeah.
gave us a lot of warnings about
Mhm.
pesticides in the environment. Well, she also was so tuned into how children know the world of nature. So she wrote the book. Let's see, what's it called? Sense of Wonder.
Right.
And
And I just learned about that. And I think that it's a bummer that she is so known for alerting us of all the dangers. and that she isn't recognized. So I'm so happy you just brought that up. Like, she was so in love with nature in such a positive way. That's why she was alerting us, don't ruin nature. We
Right.
need
And
it.
she writes in that book, that's one of the greatest gifts we can give to children is to keep that sense of wonder alive. But then she also says it's to our great misfortune that for many of us, as we get older, that sense of wonder diminishes, and thus our quality of life diminishes. So she points out that what usually happens, that wonderful thing that we have called wonder tends to diminish. But fortunately, we can renew that. And that's something I've always pointed out to teachers. You yourself have to be connected with nature in order to connect the children or to keep the children's sense of wonder alive. You need to pay attention to your own sense of wonder.
Absolutely. So I have to share sort of how I got here in this conversation with you also. And I want to hear your thoughts on it. I have spent my life, I realized, studying the impact of things on society and on behavior. Technology, I did technology for a while, business, marketing, and then I studied religion and the impact of religion on society for quite a while. I got a master's in it. And what I realized was something really core, which is that religion has this huge advantage of that it has an important part of it that is repetitive. So you are not only, in this day and age, we're supposed to learn something, hear it once, learn it. We get judged. We're like, what do you mean you don't remember? What do you mean you don't, like, we met before, you heard this before, you heard this story, I told you this one time. Like, we need to rewire our brain after it's heard, because it's heard things numerous times or learned things numerous times. Where one of the few places that happens and is accepted and is promoted is in religion. We read the same things for thousands of years, right? The same stories, we interpret them, we build these neural pathways around these specific stories. And I realized that the other place I knew that happened was in parent-child or teacher-child or children's reading. And I missed those days when I had little kids and I would read the same story over and over again. Sing the story, you tell it a different way, whatever it is, it's the same. And those are the stories that are remembered forever. Those are the memories, right? Because you're telling them again, you're repeating them, you're talking about them. So that got me into wanting to write children's books, young children's books that kids will read with their parents over and over again, so that they're both in the game. They're both experiencing the wonder, and they're continuing to experience it by talking about it. And they're carrying the metaphor, the nature metaphor that comes with My Resilience Gone Wild work forward, so that stays in their life, as their future of wonder. So I just wanted to that's where I come from, that I got here in terms of wanting to have this conversation with you and wanting to go into focusing on children and parent-child relationship and how we can help both the child and the parent. So what's coming up for you on that?
Well, I remember reading one study when I was working for the research library, and it was a parent with about a 3-year-old daughter and their conversation as they were at a nature center. So they were outside on the grounds at a nature center, and how rich the interaction was between the two. So different than what they had observed when they were indoors just looking at the exhibit. The exhibits inside. It was just entirely different. There was, as you mentioned earlier, so many different sights and sounds and feels going on. So it also enriches the interaction between the two. And other studies have backed that same thing up, that the, family enrichment part of nature, that is very, very real. But Jessica, when you said something about the repetition in terms of what we often do in religious settings, Richard Carson talks about the repeated refrains of nature. From season to season, from birth to death, there are certain refrains that we notice over and over again. The waves going in and out, just the difference between day and night, the movement of the clouds, and so many repeated refrains, and how that can be a part of not just our cognitive learning, but the calmness that sense of wonder, and that sense of just reassurance. Life goes on.
And it's comforting
It's comforting.
to go through a rhythm and and repeat a rhythm and to
Yeah.
hit a new stage of the rhythm that you've been at before. Like we are comforted by things that are familiar, right? So, and building on them. So it gets to my, I love exploring time, and time goes with rhythm. And we live in this like crazy busyness focused world where we aren't about any natural rhythms anymore, right? Like we don't go to sleep when it gets dark. We don't get up when it gets light. We go to sleep and get up when our alarm or our clock tells us to. And we just run. And there's not in any way connected to the natural, comforting, wonder-filled rhythms of nature and time. So you have this another big smile, like you're like so in the same pathway as me on this, right?
Yeah. Well, I just read something about a naturalist saying we need to enter more into botanical time. Many things grow rather slowly. We need to become more in sync with that botanical time.
I love that. Yes, watching the grass grow is actually a beautiful thing, right?
Beautiful thing. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, slowing down. It's interesting. I've gotten into, and I actually can't remember. I don't know if I can't remember what the term is, and you might know it, but the closer you get to something and look more closely at it and more intimately at it, it gets more and more complicated, more complex, the underlying, so that, watching grass grow from afar might not look like there's any change. But if you look at grass growing close up, there's movement, right? Like, and it's about how intensely you actually focus and don't get distracted. So,
yes. Yeah. We need to spend more time just being there.
yeah. And looking at the small things, because there is movement, there is change, there is something to experience. There's a story happening. There's not a lack of change and a lack of movement. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So I want to ask you about metaphor, because metaphor is a very child connected, like nature metaphors, and metaphors are used often in children, with teaching children and in teaching. And, as a psychologist and a coach, metaphors are really helpful to us because they allow that a big part of what metaphors do is they allow you to approach a topic that's very difficult to approach in its actual language. Like if you're struggling with fear of something, if you talk about the actual fear of the thing, it's much harder than if you come up with a metaphor that's like it, and then it's easier to talk about. If you worry about protection and instead you talk about a turtle shell, there's the whole nature metaphor. And I am obsessed with nature metaphors because I don't like violent metaphors, which we use tremendously, war-based metaphors in our language today. It's just constant. And it triggers, your head acts differently when you hear a violence-based metaphor rather than a nature-based metaphor. It's just your brain is in a different place when you use different language, right? So, since I'm pretty obsessed with this Resilience Gone Wild thing being about offering metaphors for people to grab onto and use to build resilience, and give them, hints to how to be more resilient. What's coming up for you about nature metaphors? I imagine that that's part of some of the teaching you've done.
Well, children's literature is so often filled with metaphors.
Yeah.
So anybody who's looking for beautiful metaphors, go to children's literature.
True, right? Yeah.
I just reread a children's book called The Other Way to Listen. We immediately think, listen, that's something we do with our ears. Our head's involved too, our mind, but the other way to listen, it's more about being present. So the little girl in the story wants to be able to hear things that the older man in the story hears. He can hear the seeds bursting open underground. He can hear the rocks humming. And so the little girl says, well, teach me how to do that. And he reminds her, I can't teach you. You need to just be there and give yourself lots of time and be very quiet and attentive. And of course, in the end, she also hears things like the corn singing. So that other way to listen, in a sense, is a metaphor because it's not the hearing with the ears. It's a different kind of taking in the messages.
I love that. It's so important. It's a different way to take in the messages and you get to choose, but you have to practice it. And I think about it, like, I'm a big fan of focusing any single sense on a channel of input. So if you're underwater, you can, and you're snorkeling, you can either hear, or scuba diving, you can hear the bubbles of your tank, or you can hear yourself, or you can listen for the fish making noise, which they do. Like, there's a channel. If I'm, I so often, like, I'm on the ocean, I can either hear the ocean and choose to just channel my listening to the ocean or a bird or some single channel, or I can say I can't hear it because there's this human noise that's disruptive, right? Yes. So, it's such a beautiful thing to practice.
Yes. Well, when I was out with the wind the other day,
yes,
tuned into the sound of the wind than just tuning into ideas in my head. It was, I am really listening to the wind. So the wind, as it moved through the future, I live in New Mexico, so we don't have a lot of trees where I live, but even the bushes and the grasses, to hear the wind move through that. Hear the wind as it rustles past my ear. I mean, it's just a beautiful way of tuning into nature, is by being there and tuning other things out.
Including yourself. We get back to that issue of, like, you're not in this. You're
right.
It's not about you.
Right. Yeah. For me, it was all about the wind.
It's so beautiful. Oh, I love it. Okay, Ruth. So where are we? What do you think? Like, now we've had this conversation for a while. It absolutely just makes my heart sing. Words of wisdom. Like, what do we do? Give us some like quick things we can do and some longer things we can do to fix this problem of nature deficiency, and to get people to wake up to how important it is, with just some simple things that we can do differently.
One is truly go outdoors in an unhurried way. So it's more than getting from your front door to your car. It is spending time outdoors, whether you are a walker, a hiker, you go fishing, or if you're a gardener, but to increase that time for at least a little bit in a very unhurried way. You don't get to develop a relationship unless you invest time and attention to it. And we yearn for that relationship with nature. It's built into our DNA. It's called biophilia, love of nature. But if we ignore it long enough, just as if you ignore somebody you love, ignore them long enough, that sense of connection diminishes. That relationship to be strong and contribute to you quality of life, spend time, focus on it. So that's one thing.
I just want to say that I keep hearing consistently that anyone who recommends that, and then they do it sort of as an activity in their job or whatever, they've never heard anyone say, I didn't like that. Everyone's right. Like, nobody's ever said they wanted to stop or they didn't enjoy it. They wanted more of it. So, we need to give ourselves that gift of just stepping in another minute and another minute, and another minute, and time disappears and joy comes, right? Joy and wonder.
Exactly. Yes. Another thing that some people might enjoy, and I've done it for years, is journaling. To actually record some of not just what you see and hear, but how you feel. Yeah. How did you feel when you hiked with the wind? How did you feel when you saw that strawberry beginning to ripen? How did you feel about that? So journaling. And another thing that I had some students do, college students, is write their ecological story. An ecological autobiography. That's been very powerful for some of the students.
Tell me. I don't know what that is. Tell me what that is. This sounds amazing.
The story of your memoir, or your autobiography, focusing on your relationship with nature. So when you were a very young child, what did you do in nature? What did you experience? What insights did you have? As you got a little bit older, how did that change? Where are you today in that relationship? I mean, when I go back to some of my journals and my own ecological autobiography, I find I wrote things like, the color of my soul, green.
And by journaling, you get to read it again. So you get to live it again.
And there's something about another gift of nature. Once you have that moment of wonder or you receive that special joy, you can revisit it. So it is there to go back to again. And if you write it down, you might be surprised, especially date it. And then look, 3 years later, what was I doing on March 24th, 5 years ago? I can go back and look. And I'm sometimes, it reaffirms my relationship with nature and how much it means to me. And sometimes it surprises me. Like, oh my gosh, I thought of that 10 years ago. So there is something about writing it down, but that idea of an ecological autobiography, seeing over time how you progressed in that relationship.
And even if you start small and you do it for a week, right? Like how are you different from once you're paying attention to something that grows, right? So from Monday to Friday, how has your thinking about nature and your feeling nature changed?
Right. You learn something about nature and you certainly learn something about yourself.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. I love it. Okay, Ruth. So I know you've retired recently but that's only a formality, I think, the language of retirement. So you've closed one door. I'm sure others are opening. I'm actually going to the Children's in Nature Network conference, which I'm so excited about. And I know you've been there in Minnesota this May. And I'm just so excited to get more and more into this world of children. So what are you doing next? You've got this incredible life's gift that you've given us.
I am writing, and I'm almost finished with it, another book. And this one is
spirituality. I can't wait to read it. I'm so excited.
It's on the spiritual dimensions of our connectedness with nature, but looking specifically at children. And I already realized I can't put everything in this book that I want to. So I started a proposal for another book that broadens it not just to children, but to all.
I can't wait to read it. Yay, I'm so excited.
Well, gee, I'm 82 years old. So when I actually retire, I'm not sure when that's going to happen.
No, there's no. That's what I'm saying. It's a bit of language that just says I moved on from one chapter to the next, right?
Right. Yes. So that's what I'm doing, and I continue to hike and write some poetry, and
and just to put it out there that you're out there at 82 years old, hiking and writing poetry and writing new books and feeling the wind and all this joy because you've stayed healthy by being in nature, right? Like you're out there doing. So. You're an inspiration. You're a role model. You're I'm honestly like a really powerful mentor for me. Thank you. I'm so happy to have you in my life, newly in my life. And thank you for sharing this joy with us.
Thank you for reaching out to me. I love the conversation.
I can't wait to keep it going. Thank you, Ruth, so much. Any last word of wisdom you want to just sort of just one-liners that you gave your teachers at the end of their sessions?
It's go out and do it. Be true to yourself, your authentic self. You are a part of nature. That nature is your natural habitat. That is where you will blossom and take others with you.
I love that. That's my joy. Take others with you. Thank you so much, Ruth. I will see you soon and be in touch. Thank you.
This has been a production of BLI Studios, produced by me, Kai. Follow along with our other BLI produced shows at balancinglifesissues.com/podcast-BLI. Got an idea for the show? Email me, Kai, at balancinglifesissues.com. And don't forget to stay in touch with your host, Jessica, at jessica@winwinwinmindset.com. Anything else to add, Miles?
Yeah.